Got a little bit of a lighting problem, so give me just 1 second. We'll get started. How about that? All right. Well, yasa, sedete, and good evening to all of you. So I'm doing this live because, frankly, I don't have enough time to edit or make videos anymore. So I thought I would just do this and have a very sort of extemporaneous conversation with all of you and with those of you that care to join. My topic for tonight is how a conversion to Orthodoxy can go wrong and sort of some of the things that I've observed. Now, I am by no means a priest. I am by no means a spiritual advisor. Instead, I'm just a layman who converted to Orthodoxy. And having converted to Orthodoxy, I have a lot of friends that converted to Orthodoxy. Welcome in those of you that are just joining. So I have a lot of friends who converted to Orthodoxy. There are a lot of people that converted with me. For some reason, it seems to be kind of a universal experience that whenever you come into the Orthodox Church, you become pretty close friends with everybody who is sort of in your class of converts. And and there have been some high-profile conversions lately, especially in this YouTube world, whatever it is. And I just want to talk about some things that I've noticed and some things that I think ultimately can cause some problems down the road. As I said, I'm not a priest, so I can't give these people spiritual advice, but I do think it's worth sharing my perspective, just for the fact that we can, by having these conversations, sort of try to avoid the pitfalls ourselves, including me. Okay, so let's sort of imagine this as a path. So congratulations, you've recently converted to Orthodoxy. What are some things that could go wrong? Well, one of the first things that happens, and I think it's a very natural thing to happen, is that a new convert finds himself or herself sort of on the defensive about converting. And having been put on the defensive about converting, they sort of have to jump into the fight. And that's all right, right? They go and they express, the reasons why they're converting to their friends and their family. Welcome in. We're talking about sort of the path of a convert and how those things might go wrong for those of you that are just joining. So a person, who converts immediately gets confronted with all sorts of, challenges, people that don't understand what they're doing or question it or what have you. And so their response is to try to find good arguments to answer those people. And that's how new converts, I think, get into apologetics so quickly. And this is, I think, the first misstep. And we all do it to a certain extent because we have to tell our parents, our friends, our spouses, in some cases, why we're converting. And so we get into the apologetics world awfully quickly. But apologetics is about changing people's minds, right? Changing people's intellectual minds about Orthodoxy. It's not what is actually called for in Orthodoxy, which is metania, which is the changing of one's, yes, mind, but the word actually is nous, which is kind of the word for heart, changing of one's entire perspective. So, you're not going to do that by arguing, right? It's not what Jesus did. It's not what the apostles did. And that's not how the church works, right? It's so immediately a convert just jumps straight into apologetics. And here's the problem with apologetics. At some level, all apologetics, whether for or against orthodoxy, are wrong. There may be truth statements, as in there may be things about the early church or things about theology that are true, but in reality, all of those arguments rest on certain premises and propositions, suppositions. That's the word I was actually looking for, not prepositions or propositions, but suppositions that have to be accepted in order for any kind of apologetics to be convincing. And the fact is that oftentimes what apologetics does is simply make people question those foundations rather than actually engage with the arguments. And when they question those foundations, eventually they realize that they're on a lot shakier epistemological ground than they thought they were. Okay. Any and all apologetics rest on probabilities, and that's not what faith is based on. It's not based on a historical argument that can ultimately be had back and forth all the way to kingdom come, and indeed will happen back and forth. It's not on these contingent arguments that scholars use about history or scholarship or literary theory or what have you, right? And so when a new convert gets immediately involved in apologetics, they sort of pigeonhole themselves into certain ideas and ways of thinking about orthodoxy that are to some extent either one-sided or untrue. The classic example that I give is when you're trying to explain to your friends, like, why do Orthodox believers pray to saints, right? And the apologetics answer, the classic apologetics answer is, well, you can always ask your friends to pray for you. Why can't you ask for your heavenly friends to pray for you? The problem with that as an argument is that, and if I may grab a book real quick. It's way over there. So the problem with that is you don't tell your friends things like this. Give me just a second. Okay, that might be a little bit quicker. You don't say things like this. Rejoice through whom joy shall shine forth. Rejoice through whom the curse shall vanish. Rejoice, fallen Adam's restoration. Rejoice, redemption of Eve's tears. Rejoice, initiate of ineffable counsel. Rejoice, faith of silent beseechers. Rejoice, introduction to Christ's miracles. Rejoice, consummation of his doctrinal articles. And those are all quotations from the Akathist to the Theotokos, right? That's not something that you say to your friends, right? You don't immediately greet your friends with, "Hail, O thou my only hope and salvation, and the only person through whose prayers I can possibly be redeemed and saved," right? That's not how we talk to our friends, right? The saints are something much more important than that. So that's just an example. I mean, we immediately sort of pigeon ourselves into these sort of very low quality arguments, and then we become one-sided in our representation of orthodoxy. And that's just a sort of minor example or a tiny example of the sort of thing that might happen. Okay, well, so having adopted sort of maybe a two-dimensional or limited view of orthodoxy, what might happen next? Well, you're going to encounter viewpoints or perspectives that perhaps differ from or contrast with your own now narrowed view of orthodoxy. And so you're going to start gathering to yourself. And of course, I'm speaking virtually. You're going to be watching a lot of YouTube videos, maybe even reading a few books about Orthodoxy. And you're going to unconsciously, or perhaps consciously, choose to exclude those writers, influencers, whatever, that disagree with your perspective, right? You're going to immediately start presuming that you yourself can be the filter for orthodoxy and say, okay, well, this Greek priest over here, he's far too liberal for me. And anyway, he makes me question some of the things that I initially assumed. So I'm going to go with this Russian priest over here. You know, I don't like what the Patriarchate of Antioch has said about, birth control or the death penalty or what have you. So I'm going to go over here to Father such and such who has a different perspective, right? You start picking and choosing which, and you can see I've been writing, yes, have ink all over my hands, but you're picking and choosing which Orthodox teachers you're going to stick with. And so immediately, especially if you've converted from Catholicism, you've certainly gotten rid of the Pope, but you've made yourself your own Pope to pick whomever you'd like as your spiritual teachers. This can get even more pernicious because oftentimes Orthodox writers, Orthodox influencers will talk about the importance of having a spiritual father. And it is true. It's very important to follow the directions and guidance of your priest. And there is a historical and current tradition of having a spiritual father, especially for monks and priests and all of that sort of thing. But many people will seek confessors and spiritual fathers that match their own little pet worldviews, right? They'll go and they'll find a nice Athonite monk who agrees with them and disagrees with their pesky parish priest who maybe is a little too charitable for certain things or doesn't rigorously apply the canons to make you fast on bread and water for a few years. This sort of thinking leads to, I believe it leads to scrupulosity on the one hand, which is not just a spiritual problem, it's a psychological problem, right? Where you actually drive yourself nuts by trying to find just the right teacher who is just strict enough to please your fancy, rather than just being an ordinary Orthodox Christian and letting things go from there. Join in the dance. Don't try to lead right away. And now you have started picking and choosing your own teachers privately, which ones you're going to watch, which ones you're going to read, which ones you're going to listen to, all of those sorts of things. So, as I said, you've sort of made yourself your own internal pope. And what comes from that is a sort of savior complex. So now, not only internally are you picking and choosing your Orthodox leaders, you're going to try to do so for everyone else because you've listened to just the right combination of people that please your fancy or please your reading of the Rudder, which, God forbid, that you picked up as an early Orthodox convert. Leave the Pedalion alone. In your early stages of conversion, please. But you think that you are, for everyone else, going to help out the Orthodox Church. Poor Orthodoxy, you say. You're just so lost in your ethnophiletism, which does not mean what you think it means, but you're so worried that the Orthodox are just too Eastern. I mean, too Eastern as in Eastern Roman Empire, right? You're You're too worried that Greece just doesn't make the cut of being part of Western civilization. I mean, how silly is that thinking, by the way? Right? Oh, it's just too Eastern, when literally every world history book in the West starts with Greece. If you're talking about Western civilization. But nonetheless, we got a little battery problem here. I think we can fix it. There we go. So you develop this savior complex. You're going to save Orthodoxy in America, which, by the way, has been here for, over 200 years in the Eastern Rite. But you think you're going to save Orthodoxy in America by promoting the Western Rite. Good on you. But whatever your savior complex leads you to think, it all started with this idea that you get to pick and choose which aspects of Orthodoxy are most pleasing to you. Okay, young convert, imagining that I am going through this process, I have first jumped straight into apologetics. Then I realized that my apologetics were maybe one-sided, and I picked my own teachers. And having picked my own teachers, I noticed there were a lot of Orthodox who didn't like my teachers. And so I'm going to jump in and try to save everybody and save poor Orthodoxy, and make sure that they're not, being too un-American. That's my favorite thing. Now, having done all that, I then decide that the church isn't doing good enough as far as, just fixing the church isn't quite enough. I, having become the savior of the church, and now I'm going to become the savior of the world. And so I start branching out from church politics into politics. And y'all might think that this is kind of a jump, but I have seen it so often among new converts, because they're converting to Orthodoxy, many of them because they think it's based, or it's alt-right, or it's whatever. And so they're going to jump from that, especially, and it has to be said, especially if they're associating Orthodoxy with certain political leaders of certain Eastern European countries, or of certain cultures, or what have you. They decide that they're going to get involved in politics on behalf of the Orthodox Church, of course. Never mind what the bishops are doing. Never mind what the canonical bishops are doing. So having developed a savior complex for the church, the new convert decides that they are going to be the savior of the world. Not only the first Advent Messiah, but the second one too, if they can. That's not quite what theosis means, I don't think. But so they get involved in politics, and inevitably this is so cringe, right? This becomes so cringe because they don't have the experience or the knowledge to get involved in politics. Even if you said, well, political views don't require any, overt expertise, the law does, political science does, and many of the people who attempt to get involved in politics end up coming off like loony, sovereign citizen sorts of people. Yes, I'm a lawyer by trade, so this is something that particularly annoys me. So they go in with the loony side of politics. They start saying that they're sovereign citizens, or that they're exempt from laws, or that, habeas corpus, or whatever, stupidity they decide to come up with, or into Christian nationalism, which, Orthodoxy has a history of responsible participation in the state. It's never been the case that Orthodoxy and politics, or Orthodoxy and the state have been entirely separated. They've always ideally worked together, but sometimes worked at opposite ends. And sometimes the church has caved to political pressure, and sometimes the state has bowed to ecclesiastical pressure. So there's certainly an interplay between the church and politics, but always historically that was between hierarchy and the political leaders, not from ordinary laymen and new converts, for whom, to quote one priest in my life, the chrism has not yet become dry. Right? Orthodoxy is not overtly political. It dwells in all kinds of political systems. It has and it will survive any given political system. There is no impetus to adopt partisan politics for the Orthodox Church. It doesn't. That's just not how Orthodoxy works, at least in my experience. They may get involved in politics, but whether it's partisan or not is a whole different question. So getting involved in politics. Now, I'm not saying that, by the way. If you are a politician and you're watching this feed, first of all, welcome. Do you need an attorney? No, I'm just joking. But if you are a politician and you're watching this feed, getting involved in politics, I'm not saying don't or do, or, that you can't be Orthodox and be involved in politics. All I'm saying is that don't come into Orthodoxy thinking that it's primarily about saving the culture or saving the political system. It's not. Finally, and this is the one that caused me to start this, to come up with this topic and start this live feed. So I talked about how the new convert first jumps into apologetics, starts choosing his own teachers, then develops a savior complex for the church, finally a savior complex for the world, and last, I think, is the most pernicious, and that a lot of Orthodox converts, not a tiny portion, but a lot of Orthodox convert influencers. Let me actually clarify. Not a lot of Orthodox converts, but a lot of Orthodox convert influencers then move on from politics to race. And they want to get involved in these race-baiting debates, online, on X, in all of these forums, and try to, take on the plight of the poor, beleaguered white man. Well, I'm sorry, it is not the place